At narito naman ang mainit na balita mula sa mundo ng politika. Ilang retiradong general ang naglabas ng kanilang mga testimonyang may kinalaman sa kasalukuyang administrasyon ni President Kuting ng Norte Jr. Samantala, ang Vice Presidente ng bansa na si VP Sara Duterte ay nakatamo ng tagumpay sa Korte Suprema ukol sa isang controversial na issue. Inilabas ng ilang retiradong general ang kanilang mga testimonya laban kay President Kuting ng Norte Jr. na may kaugnayan sa mga aligasyon ng maling pamamahala at posibleng mga paglabag sa karapatang pantao. Ayon sa mga general, sila ay may dokumentadong ebidensya na maaaring magpatibay sa mga akusasyon laban sa administrasyon. Sa mga testimonya nila, ipinahayag nila ang kanilang mga saloobin ukol sa mga isyong kinakaharap ng kasalukuyang gobyerno na nagbigay ng kontrobersiya sa buong bansa. Ang pahayag na ito ay agad na naging usap-usapan sa mga social media platforms. Ang mga retiradong general ay tinuturing na may mataas na kredibilidad sa mata ng publiko kaya't malaki ang epekto ng kanilang mga testimonya sa mga isyu ng gobyerno. Ang ilan sa kanila ay nagsabing ito ay isang hakbang upang mailahad ang katotohanan at upang magbigay liwanag sa mga nangyayaring hindi tama. Ang mga pahayag na ito ay nakakatulong upang magbigay ng bagong perspektive at mag-udyok sa mga mamamayan na magtanong at magsuri sa mga hakbang ng administrasyon. Samantala, isang malaking tagumpay naman ang tinatamo ni Vice President Sara Duterte sa Korte Suprema. Ang isyong tinalakay ay may kinalaman sa isang iligal na hamon na sa kanyang mga kapangyarihan at ang mga aksyon ng kanyang opisina. Sa desisyon ng Korte Suprema, pinalakas ang mga pahayag ni VP Sara at itinaguyod ang kanyang mga legal na hakbang. Sa isang pahayag mula sa kanyang tanggapan, sinabi ni VP Sara na ito ay isang panalo, hindi lamang para sa kanya kundi para rin sa buong bansa at ang integridad ng kanyang posisyon. Ayon sa mga eksperto ng batas, ang tagumpay ni VP Sara Duterte sa Korte Suprema ay may malaking epekto sa mga susunod na legal na hakbang at mga issue na may kinalaman sa mga opisyal ng gobyerno. Matapos ang desisyon, marami ang nagbigay ng suporta kay VP Sara kasama na ang mga miyembro ng kanyang partido at mga taga-suporta. Ito ay isang malinaw na pahayag ng Korte Suprema na may respeto sa mga karapatan ng mga opisyal na naninindigan para sa kanilang mga tungkulin. Sa kabila ng mga kontrobersya, patuloy na umaasa ang mga mamamayan na ang mga isyong ito ay magdudulot ng mas malinaw na direksyon para sa bansa. Habang ang mga retiradong general ay nagpapahayag ng kanilang mga saloobin laban kay PBBM, si VP Sara Duterte naman ay nagtagumpay sa korte. Isang pahayag ng tagumpay at integridad. At heto nga mga balitang ating pagkakatutukan at kung bago ka pa lamang sa aking channel ay huwag kakalimutang mag-like, share and subscribe para updated ka sa aming mga bagong balita dito sa TATAK Pinas.
Starting with the word in up to the word plan, and in lieu thereof, insert the following. Except for enterprises implementing an upskilling program for their employees, no enterprise shall be allowed to have IBET trainees more than 20% of the total number of its regular employees. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Chair is none. Same is approved.
On page 9, line 1, insert a new section which will read as follows. Section Implementing Agency. TESDA shall be the primary agency responsible for the implementation of this act. It shall set the policies and guidelines for the implementation of the IBET framework and shall be responsible for quality assurance and evaluation of registered IBET programs. It shall have the following duties and responsibilities. Letter A, determine and issue the list of IBET priority occupations and approve new IBET occupations as endorsed by industry boards or industry associations and other concerned stakeholders. Letter B, approve and certify IBET programs applied for registration by enterprises. Letter C, issue policies and guidelines on the implementation of the IBET programs. Letter D, monitor the conduct of IBET programs by enterprises and their compliance with the training plan, IBET agreement, general labor standards, and occupational safety and health standards in coordination with DOLE. Letter E, validate and certify trainees who successfully pass the assessment process. Letter F, conduct audits on IBET programs and implementers. Letter G, cancel CTPRs of enterprises that fail to comply with this act. And letter H, perform other functions as may be necessary for the effective implementation of this act. Thereafter, renumber the succeeding sections accordingly. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendment is approved.
Mr. President, on Section 8 now, on page 9, line 1, replace the title of Section 18 with TESDA and industry participation. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, same is approved.
On the same page, delete lines 1 to 4 except for the title. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, same is approved.
Still on page 9, line 7, after the word 2, insert the following: continuously improve IBET policies and guidelines, and 2. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, the amendment is approved.
Still on page 9, delete lines 12 and 13. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, same is approved.
Mr. President, the section shall now read as follows. Section 18, TESDA and industry participation. TESDA and industry boards shall undertake the identification and prioritization of qualifications and the development and/or updating of competency standards, assessment tools, and curricula to continuously improve IBET policies and guidelines and to ensure broader participation of all stakeholders in the implementation of IBET programs. Pending the establishment of an industry board in a specific sector, TESDA shall undertake the development and/or updating of competency standards, assessment tools, and curricula. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? There being none, same is approved.
Mr. President, on page 9, between lines 13 and 14, insert a new section which shall read as follows. Section, termination of IBET agreement. The IBET agreement shall be binding during its term. However, the trainee or the enterprise may terminate the agreement for cause or by mutual consent of the parties upon prior notice. Thereafter, renumber the succeeding sections accordingly. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, the amendment is approved.
New section, Mr. President, on the same page, we insert a new section which shall read as follows. Section, prohibited acts and penalties. The following acts are hereby prohibited. Commission on fraud or deceit in the application, registration, and implementation of the IBET program. Letter B, discontinuation of a registered IBET program without notice to TESDA. Letter C, non-payment of training allowance or payment of training allowance below the prescribed amount. Letter D, assignment of trainees to hazardous places not covered by the training plan. And letter E, non-compliance with any of the provisions of this act or its implementing rules and regulations. An enterprise who commits any of the above enumerated acts shall be administratively liable to TESDA and shall be imposed a fine in the amount of 10,000 pesos to 100,000 pesos. Additionally, TESDA may also order the suspension or revocation of the CTPR granted to an enterprise. The penalties under this section are without prejudice to other liabilities arising from the existing civil, administrative, and criminal laws for the same act or violation. Renumber the succeeding sections accordingly. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, same is approved.
Mr. President, after the new section on prohibited acts and penalties, insert a new section which shall read as follows. Section, transitory provision. All existing IBET programs shall be valid until after the TESDA has conducted an assessment and revalidation of these programs in accordance with this act. Renumber the succeeding sections accordingly. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, the amendment is approved.
Bear with me, Mr. President. I'm almost done. On page 9, line 19, delete the word for, and in lieu thereof, insert the word to in words and numbers. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, the amendment is approved.
On the same page, line 20, delete the words 4 years, and in lieu thereof, insert the word year. The phrase will now read as follows. 2 years after the effectivity of this act and every year thereafter, the TESDA shall conduct a review of the implementation and accomplishments of this act. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, the amendment is approved.
On page 9, delete the entire section 21. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, the same is approved.
On page 10, delete lines 1 to 4 of the section on the repealing clause, and in lieu thereof, insert the following. Section 23, repealing clause. Republic Act number 7686 or the Dual Training System Act of 1994 is hereby repealed. Book 2, Title 2, Chapters 1 and 2 of Presidential Decree number 442 as amended, or the Labor Code of the Philippines are hereby repealed. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, same is hereby approved.
We'd like to put on record, Mr. President, that the amendments given to us by our colleagues, especially the synchronization of the apprenticeship bill sponsored and defended by our Senate President Pro Tem Jinggoy Estrada, is also part of the amendments. And also, Mr. President, the bulk of the amendments also came from our Education Commission. who is headed by Carl, who is here right now with us in the session hall.
With the permission of the distinguished sponsor, Chair received a message from Senator Cayetano interposing no objection as to the closure of the period of individual amendments subject to a presentation of a clean copy that she can review. Thereafter, only thereafter will we approve it on second reading. That is her request with the permission and magnanimity of the
Yes.
Honorable Villanueva.
Yes, Mr. President.
you.
Thank you for that. Mr. President, I can see a lot of hands raising. Perhaps
Mr.
they-
President, the minority leader is recognized.
Please,
You may proceed, sir.
please do not misinterpret our silence the entire time when you ask for if there is any objection because, Mr. President, it was really impossible to follow all of the amendments, the effects of the amendments because as now admitted by the sponsor, it has transformed from a framework law. Framework law na supposed to be to very simple, enterprise-based training. Ngayon, I think the sponsor said that the amendments are merging some concepts and ideas from another bill.
Still is, Mr. President, still is a framework.
Yes,
Mr.
I know, but we're merging. Kaya nga, I joined the call of Senator, was it Senator Pia? Yes, Senator Pia Cayetano for a clean copy. But we do not agree that we close the period of amendments. We keep it open, Mr. President. That's the purpose of asking for a clean copy. Kaya nga may chance pa kaming mag-amend, Mr. President. So, just a clean copy,
course.
Mr. President.
I have no problem with that, Mr. President, as the sponsor of
With
the
the
measure.
permission of the minority leader, in any event, the closure was without prejudice to any member
Yes.
seeking a reconsideration of the
Yes,
same.
so-
But we don't need to close it at this time.
Yes, so wala nang burden of
course.
of moving for reconsideration, Mr. President.
Of course. Thank you,
Mr.
Senator
President.
Pimentel, our minority leader. Senator Gatchalian is recognized. You may proceed, sir.
Yeah, Mr. President, I want to join the good minority leader in the request for a clean copy. I have a few amendments that I would like to propose. However, I don't have the section number because a lot of things have moved. So I join the minority leader to that. And it will also give me an opportunity to share my amendments with the good sponsor.
Thank you, Senator Gatchalian. We will do that. And I believe Senator Risa would like to make a manifestation in regard to the same subject, perhaps.
Salamat, Abby, Mr. President. Mr. President, I'd like to deliver this short manifestation. I'd like to thank the good sponsor, salamat po, for accepting our amendments, particularly on our concerns on the financial constraints that trainees undergo in participating in enterprise-based education and training programs, and the potential abuses by companies to use trainees to replace regular employees in order to cut costs for their benefit. This bill will now ensure that trainees under the general EBET program will be able to receive allowances from the enterprise to cover their transportation costs, meals, and other expenses agreed upon between the trainee and enterprise. This will provide significant financial support for trainees who pursue the general EBET program. I am also pleased that there will be a 20% limit on the number of trainees proportional to the number of employees in an enterprise, unless TESDA increases this percentage through thorough assessment of its necessity. This will further prevent companies from misusing EBET to cut costs by having trainees instead of regular employees. For the record, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. We thank our colleague, the Deputy Minority Leader, for raising this very important issue. And we also thank the members of this institution for giving us a lot of insights in a way where we can really protect our trainees without sacrificing the quality of education that will be implemented in the enterprises. Thank you, Mr. President.
We thank the distinguished sponsor for his industry and patience as well,
And-
of everyone who listened to his amendment.
And we'll also like to thank the presiding officer, now our Senate President, for trusting this representation to actually be appointed as his subcommittee chair during the time when he was heading the Senate Committee on Higher and Technical Education. And that's the reason why I'm standing here today. Thank you, Mr. President.
The reason, Your Honor, was because I knew that you knew the subject matter more than I ever would. Thank you, Your Honor. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President, Mr. President, I move that we suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 2587. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, motion is approved. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill number 2665 under Committee Report number 251. This is the bill on the Philippine Archipelagic Sea Lanes Act. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, the motion is approved.
Mr. President, the parliamentary status of this bill is that we are still in the period of interpellation, and with the consent of the body, I move to resume the period of interpellation and seek recognition as a sponsor, and to continue with this interpellation, our Minority Leader, Senator Coco Pimentel III. I so move, Mr. President.
The distinguished Majority Leader is recognized as sponsor of the measure, and the distinguished Minority Floor Leader is likewise recognized to interpellate. The gentlemen both have the floor.
Mr. President, sa duties na lang nung test na ABC. Ano na? Huwag ka naman birthday nila.
Thank you, Mr. President. This will just be a continuation of our interpellation yesterday. And with the permission of our sponsor? if we
Yes,
can-
Mr. President. Willingly, Mr. President.
Mr. President, yesterday we made the revelation that there's an international body, the IMO. Ano bang meaning ng IMO? International Maritime Office?
International Maritime Organization.
Oh, International Maritime Organization, which will review any law, any domestic law establishing archipelagic sea lanes pursuant to UNCLOS. May I ask the sponsor, what would be the extent of the review of the IMO? Would it be only limited to the technical description or delineation of the sea lanes identified by the archipelagic state, Mr. President?
Mr. President, the scope of the review, and probably this will surprise some of our listeners, would even include a disapproval of any sea lane designated by any archipelagic state, Mr. President.
How about the other provisions in the measure that we are considering? Kunyari, who will be the government agency in charge? The prohibited acts. What prohibited acts? The delegation to the to the president of the power to establish and/or substitute sea lanes. Will those substantive measures be also within the jurisdiction of the IMO to review?
Mr. President, let's dissect the matters mentioned by the minority leader into its finer points. Speaking of the law enforcement side, wherein the Coast Guard, the Navy, or Customs authorities would be involved. The Philippines will have complete control and jurisdiction once this is approved. But if the good gentleman is referring to the sea lanes as well as the coordinates, likewise the same will be threshed out by an administrative body of the Philippines. And number three, when it comes to the general sea lanes, archipelagic sea lanes, it would need the concurrence and imprimatur of the IMO in terms of its announcement and approval and acceptance by the international community, specifically the UNCLOS signatories and members of the International Maritime Organization, as well as the signatories to the Chicago Convention, Mr. President. So, hinati-hati ko po, yung pagpapatupad sa ating karagatan, ng ating batas karagatan, tayo po yon. Yung pagpapatupad ng pagpili ng coordinates, tayo po yon, NAMRIA po yon. Yung pagpapaanunsyo at pagkuha ng pagtanggap to how to gain the acceptance of the international community, that's the job of the International Maritime Organization.
Is it correct to say that the official recognition of the archipelagic sea lanes designated by the Republic of the Philippines through this measure that is the one which is subject to approval by the IMO?
Correct, Mr. President. Because when we adhered to the Law of the Sea Conference 1, 2, and 3, we agreed, and this is now part of customary international law, and customary international law under our Constitution is part of the laws of the land. We adhered to the precept that an international organization would be the one in charge of all the sea lanes in the entire world. So, Mr. President, it is not letting go of a portion of our sovereignty. It is not an exercise of auto-limitation, but an acceptance of our obligation as a signatory to UNCLOS that we would adhere to that provision that it has to be approved first by an international organization, and that international organization happens to be the International Maritime Organization, or IMO.
Out of treaty obligation, Mr. President, I don't think I can agree with this earlier statement of the sponsor that this is already a generally accepted
Yes, it is.
principle of customary law, Mr. President. Because of UNCLOS siguro, because we signed UNCLOS, sabi doon, this is the procedure, then we follow the procedure.
It has been transformed into, with all due respect, as a customary international law, Mr. President. I have a...
Yes, I respect the opinion of the position of our majority leader. But I will just limit my comment to the fact that it is clear in UNCLOS that we also agreed to the procedure. But since the essence, di ba sa statutory construction meron ganun there is an essence of a law, of a bill. The essence of this law is actually the establishment of those archipelagic sea lanes. Ang ibig sabihin po ba nito that for as long as the sea lanes have not been officially recognized or approved by the IMO, the entire law is in effect
Limbo.
suspended
Limbo.
in a suspended situation, Mr. President.
No, Mr. President. Pending the approval, the imprimatur of the IMO, the said sea lanes would still be considered as a normal passage route, Mr. President. So it can still be implemented. It can still be enforced. And other maritime countries can exercise their rights to pass through, traverse the said sea lanes, Mr. President.
Yes, but can we now limit the foreign vessels to those three archipelagic sea lanes? Because some of them may say that there are other lanes which are normally or historically
why-
and traditionally used by their ships But can we, upon the passage of this bill, can we now limit the sea lanes to the 3 mentioned in the bill, Mr. President?
Yes, I think that was one of the issues raised yesterday by the minority leader. The sea lanes, if adopted and approved by IMO, would one ensure that other maritime nations would take notice of the existence of the said sea lanes. 2, it would likewise have a parallel benefit of having an overflight right over the said archipelagic sea lanes. 3, it would likewise enable even military vessels such as submarines to pass by the said sea lanes in a normal mode, meaning to say they can pass through it submerged without showing their flags. So, Mr. President, as I mentioned yesterday, and the records would show that for purposes of predictability and for purposes of law enforcement efficiency on the part of the Philippines, the sea lanes would surely be needed, Mr. President. So question is, your question, Your Honor, is that would it prevent the other vessels not to utilize the sea lanes? No. But they can be challenged and be required to stray away from the non-declared archipelagic sea lanes, especially if they are doing a conduct which can be considered as non-innocent. Meaning to say, if they are involved in fishing, if they are involved in scientific research, if they are involved in military exercises, etc., etc., and they have to be, and they are supposed to pass under a different mode, meaning to say they have to expose their flags, Mr. President.
Yes, but Mr. President, those so-called non-innocent passage activities can really be challenged with or without this measure. Tama po ba? Is that the correct interpretation? Even if there is no ASL law, there's no measure. If the activity does not qualify as innocent passage, that can be really challenged, Mr. President. We don't need a law to challenge that because that's part of international law.
No, if it is consistent with innocent passage, they cannot be challenged.
If it is not consistent with innocent passage,
Yes.
katulad nung example niyo po kanina na
Yes,
they are fishing, conducting scientific research. But we can challenge them even without this bill, Mr. President.
Correct.
Yes. So, now my next question, Mr. President, is meron tayong sa bill na parang delegation of power to the President to add additional archipelagic sea lanes or even substitute. Substitute siguro is to designate a new one and then anong tawag mo doon, retire the already established sea lane. Ito po bang mga provisions na to, around 2 to 3 sections ito, are these also subject, this delegation by Congress to the President, subject to the review of the IMO? This concept?
No, Mr. President. Let me clarify this. Perhaps the minority leader is referring to sections 9 and 10.
Yes.
Section 9 refers to additional archipelagic sea lanes. Section 10 refers to substitution of archipelagic sea lanes. Mr. President, am I correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Correct.
So, my understanding, Mr. President, is that Section 9 and Section 10 should be read together, Mr. President. So, this is how I would illustrate this. If the apprehension of the good gentleman is that we will be subjecting these sections again to the approval of the IMO, answer is yes. Answer is yes. Because, Mr. President, the sections mentioned a while ago, sections 9 and 10, stem from an IMO resolution and an UNCLOS provision. To be specific, Article 53, Section 9 of UNCLOS states that, and I quote, in designating or substituting sea lanes or prescribing or substituting traffic separation schemes, an archipelagic state, now refers to the Philippines, shall refer proposals to the competent international organization with a view to their adoption. Now we're now referring to IMO. So IMO in 1998 issued IMO Resolution number 7169.